Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some books that I think are wonderful, fantastic, but have some entries in the series that are not really my favorites. Despite the name, I don't actually think these are bad books. I just think compared to earlier entries in the series, these books are not as good as some of the other ones. It's of course really subjective and a lot of people are going to completely disagree. I'm going to start with the one that I think the most people are going to disagree with me on, which is totally okay, but that would be Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. Occasionally I get asked why it's turned around. That is not actually Golden Sun right there. I let someone borrow my copy, so that's a placeholder essentially. But anyway, Golden Sun, most people find to be much better than the first book. They feel the first book in the Red Rising series is a little too Hunger Games-esque, that it feels a little too familiar, too many tropes. Some people feel it's too close to the young adult age range in tone, and I like both young adult and adult. I just happen to be way more of a character-driven reader and an emotionally driven reader. And I've always found that the first book is more emotionally driven and the second book is much more action-packed, and it's a lot heavier with the science fiction elements, especially when it comes to things, I'm going to sound like an idiot here, but space battles. I just feel like it's got way more of that kind of stuff. It opens up, becomes much broader in scope. But I kind of liked the more intimate setting of the first one. I liked getting to know our main character, and it's not that you don't get to know him in the second one. It's not like that goes completely on the back burner. I just feel like the second one, the action really is at the forefront, which is why most people like it more. Next up, we have Time of Contempt by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is part of the Witcher series, so most of you know The Witcher starts with a collection of short stories, and then you have an additional collection of short stories, and then the official series starts with Blood of Elves. This one is the second book in the series / fourth book overall. Time of Contempt for me in the series, while I do enjoy most of the books, this one highlights a lot of the things that are not absolutely my favorite elements of Andrzej Sapkowski's writing. I always joke that he has non-playable characters come up in his books, which would be point of views that are not main characters, they're not side characters, they're just people that exist in this world, and you just see things through their eyes for a little bit, and then you go back to the main character. But I just love Geralt so much. I love Yennefer. I really want more of them, more of their point of views. And I love the first half of Time of Contempt. But the second half, some of the events that take place, they end up, I don't want to spoil things, of course, but the direction that the story goes in and the places that our characters are in, it's not my favorite. I think it gets drawn out quite a lot. And it's just, in the series, it's my least favorite, but it is followed by my favorite entry in the series, so that's always nice. Next up, a lot of you know that this is my least favorite entry of this series, and that would be Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, the third book in the Stormlight Archive series. This one, to me, the pacing just has a lot of hiccups. Some scenes that I really wanted to see were just kind of glossed over. And then other scenes that I couldn't care less about, we spent a lot of time with, and sometimes it felt a little repetitive. My husband recently read this, and he joked that this one character just constantly is texting and then Skype calling people all the time to try to get them to side with him, and I'm like, that's exactly what's going on, and it's boring. I do not care about watching this person be like, hey, do you want to come join me? And they're like, no. And then he's like, I gotta try again. Do you want to come join me? And then later he has the ability to like kind of talk to them in a more advanced way. And it's the same thing. It's so frequent. There are some absolutely amazing scenes in this particular book. There's some scenes I love at the beginning. There's some scenes about 3/4 of the way through the book that are so heartbreaking. But there's also a lot of scenes that I just didn't care that much about. Still a great book, I just love the other entries so much. Next up, and sticking with Brandon Sanderson, we have Starsight, and this is the second book in his Skyward series. This is a young adult sci-fi story, and the main character in this one has to face so much adversity because they live on a planet that is constantly being attacked from the sky, and therefore they place a lot of emphasis on their air force, and her father famously abandoned in a really important battle, so she has this dream to be a pilot but constantly has to deal with the reputation that her father kind of left behind. And I found that this character initially was bordering on insufferable because they are so feisty to the extreme, but you can see it's clearly a show because they feel so put down and they constantly have to face so many challenges that they are almost projecting this image. They want people to see them a certain way so they can believe they are this thing. And the character growth throughout the story is phenomenal in the first one. The camaraderie in the first one is wonderful, really high stakes. And the second one, I felt I missed a lot of what I liked about the first one. The camaraderie isn't really there the same way. The character development compared to the first one, I just didn't feel was as strong, which isn't a negative thing because this one I thought focused so much more on the world building. And you're probably going to see a trend where I tend to find that if second books in a series have a slight shift from character work to world building, I miss the character stuff because that's my thing. That's what I like in books. So I did miss that a little bit in this. The world building was interesting, but I just rarely feel really emotionally connected to world building. I know sometimes when I do these sorts of videos, you guys joke that you can tell what I'm going to say by the books that are missing on my shelf, so you might have noticed a book missing up here. That would be The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is the third book in the Grimdark First Law trilogy, of which I loved the second one so much. One of my favorite books. The first one took a while for me to get into because this is so extremely character driven that for a long time you're like, what the heck is even happening? Like, what are we doing here? And then you start to get to know the characters and you're like, oh, we're not doing anything. We're just following them as they do stuff. But they don't really have any motivations and plans. They just kind of go with the flow. But the characters are so well written. I loved following these characters, getting to know these characters. Glocta, I know some people feel he's overrated, but a lot of us really love him. I loved him so much. I hated Giselle, but I loved to hate Giselle. Logan Ninefingers is awesome. Pharaoh's a rage monster, but she was cool too. And in this third one, I almost felt like the downside to having such an emphasis on characters meant that in the third one, as we were wrapping up plot stuff, I was kind of like, that's it? That's the end? So I was a little disappointed with this last entry just because I felt like some of the things that happened, they weren't very impactful to me. Next up, we have a middle book in a series that I really truly think this one just had middle book syndrome, and that would be Soul of the Sword by Julie Kagawa. This is the middle book in the Shadow of the Fox trilogy, which I loved. If you're a fan of anime, I absolutely recommend this trilogy. I think you're gonna adore it. We follow a character who has fox powers, is mischievous, but very naive and innocent, and then we have a character who's a part of this samurai ninja shadow clan, and they have this demonic sword, and the two of them have to pair together to go on this epic journey, basically. So it's a traveling story, and I love the Japanese lore in this, especially with the monsters. I thought it was so great. But the second one, part of what I loved so much about the first is these two characters who are so different and have such clashing personalities having to work together. I thought it was precious. And something occurs that changes things in this second one to where, similar to with Starsight, I kind of missed that element in the second one. I do feel like the third one totally brings it home. Insanely high stakes, and I loved the third one. I really, really like this trilogy as a whole, but the second one felt like we kind of had to get through it a little bit to get to that third one. Next up are a couple of conclusions to trilogies. One, this is, I think, a fairly popular opinion, and that would be Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. I say it's fairly popular, but I think it still has quite good ratings on Goodreads. But ultimately, the end of this trilogy was, I mean, it was fine. I can't really say the tone of the ending because that in and of itself is essentially a spoiler, so I'm not going to say. But the appeal for me with this series, a lot of you know or have heard that it's fae and they're really dark, but there's like sensuous, sexy fae and stuff like that, which I know some people love and some people totally hate. But the thing that I really enjoyed about this was in the second book, the fae, this is throughout the whole trilogy, not just the second one, but the fae can't lie. Our main character is a human who is living among the fae, and they're very looked down upon. But one bit of strength that they have over the fae is that they can lie. So they end up kind of taking some power for themselves by utilizing this ability But because the Fae can't lie, they're very good at basically lying. Saying something like, you know that someone you know is a traitor, but you don't know if what they're saying is they're a traitor years ago or they're a traitor now, or so it's very difficult to figure out what they mean and if what they're saying is just a mess with you and cause you to be suspicious of everyone around you, or if they're just basically bluffing. And I really found that to be a strength of the second one. There was a lot of twists and turns, and I thought that was really fun. I liked the scheming and essentially the politicking of the second one. I was hoping to get a lot more of that in this third one, especially with the way the second one ends, because it's quite the cliffhanger ending. And I don't really think that this third one, it didn't really pull at those things the way the second book did. Last on this list, and this makes me so sad that this is here, because if you've been watching some of my recent videos, you know I loved the first two, so to not have loved this one is such a bummer. But The Queen of Sorrow by Sarah Beth Durst. This is the third book in the Queens of Renthia series. The first one is Queen of Blood. The second one is The Reluctant Queen. I loved these, especially the second one. I loved and adored the second book so much. You've probably heard me sing this series praises because it has an amazing forest setting that is very dark and vicious and unique. I thought the way that the author wrote this setting, she had every bit of it kind of ingrained into the characters' daily lives, the fear that the characters have, the way they have to live through these dangerous spirits that really want to kill people all the time. It's a very interesting story. I have individual reviews for both the first two, and I still recommend the first two. You actually, if you wanted, I haven't even started talking about the third one yet because I don't want to, but you could technically read the first two and then not read the third one if you wanted. But this third one just, I felt like it didn't kind of deliver on its promises, which is just a fancy way of saying that I didn't like the direction it went in. So basically, like, she didn't do exactly what I wanted is what I'm saying, which is fine. It didn't go in the direction I wanted. It didn't go in a direction that I wanted. It started to, and I liked the direction it was going in, and I was like, oh man, this might end up being my favorite book in the series. And then the ending, the last chunk, I was like, well, what the heck was the point then? What was the point of all of this? I just felt like there were some things that were presented that I was like, oh wow, this is going to be so cool. I have no idea what's going on, but I can't wait to find out. And then the author was like, do you want to find out? Never mind, you don't get to find out because the answers that I was going to give you aren't actually answers. So, oops, I just was so bummed about that. Ugh, it's fine. I still would recommend the series. I enjoyed most of this third book. I just, man, you know, when a series doesn't end in a way that you find satisfying, I can be, of course, more forgiving of a middle book, because if you stick the landing, you know, you stuck the landing, you're fine. But when you're soaring through the air and everything's majestic, and then you crash and like break your legs, you're like, this sucks. Not that the book sucks. It just sucks that it didn't end in a way that I wanted. That's it for some series that I think are fantastic, but have some entries that I think are not as good. Of course, that's going to happen as some of the other entries in the series. Let me know what one of your least favorite sequels is in a series that you ultimately still really enjoy. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.